Okay, we're going to do part two book review. Here's the book, How the Catholic Church Built Civilization by Thomas Woods. In part one, I mostly just gave you the link so you can see they made a whole video series about it if you want to watch that. Okay, so first of all, Thomas Woods, a Harvard-trained historian. He's also an economist, very smart guy. And he makes the point, Western civilization is the greatest civilization of all time. When people say civilization, what they mean is Western civilization. And when they say Western civilization, what they mean by that is Christian civilization. So basically, Christian civilization is the highest civilization of all time. It is superior to all others. There's nothing even close, okay? Just ask yourself, where did all these great things in the world come from? And you will see almost all of them came from Christian civilization. There's some exceptions to that, but very few. Western civilization was built by the Catholic Church, okay? And Thomas Woods makes the point that the Catholic Church is the greatest institution ever in the history of mankind. And it's pretty obvious when you look at things a little more closely. Now, I'm fully aware that the modern church, the modern papacy is under control of the Antichrist, and the current pope is a piece of crap. He's an enemy of the church. I'm aware of that, of the organized church. But I'm going to talk today about the tradition of the Catholic Church and what it had done, okay, because it's extraordinary. And most people don't know this. Okay, so why did, I meant to show you the copy of the cover of the book. I had myself in the way. Sorry about that. So here, let's just look at this again here. I'm going to get out of the way now. And so just so you can see the book. There's an audio CD version of the book, and of course there's the paper version that I just showed you. And there's the video version that I have a link to that was made later. Okay, so it's a magnificent book. Okay, so now the question is, why did the world sort of regress with the fall of the Roman Empire? Because the Romans had established a lot of things. They had built aqueducts to transport water in from the mountains. They had built a sewer system. They had libraries. The aristocrats, many of them were quite literate. One of the greatest literary speakers of all time was Cicero, the greatest of all Romans. Quintilian had a school of rhetoric. So the Romans did some good things. They built a lot of roads, okay, built a lot of nice buildings. Now here is the problem with the Middle Ages. The Catholic Church was basically civilization. Everything outside of the Catholic Church in general was barbarism. You would typically have a secular ruler who was basically a barbarian who just was interested in their own power, their own equivalent of money and control, okay? And the barbarians were running around robbing each other, looting each other. And, you know, the old Hobbes saying life was nasty, brutish, and short, okay? And they were illiterate. Secular rulers in general are not interested in books and civilization, especially in those days, okay? So here's what Will Durant says, the great historian. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the reason for retrogression of civilization was barbarism and wars, okay? Now, this is a useful quote. This is Douglas MacArthur, the great, genius American general from World War I and World War II. He said the most common cause for war is undefended wealth. So basically, there's always a bunch of secular rulers in all these countries, and they look around and they say to themselves, you know what? Our neighbors have something I want, and their military is not as strong as ours. Why don't we go over there and kick their ass and take their stuff? But they go, we don't want everybody to think we're mean, so let's just say that they're doing something, they're a homicidal maniac, and we have to go in there preemptively and to defend ourselves, of course, self-defense, and we'll kick their ass and take their stuff. Okay, that's how most secular rulers are all over the world since the beginning of recorded time. And they're dictators and tyrants, and they just want power for themselves. They want, a bunch of concubines for different days of the week and the month. And they want everybody else to shut up and not annoy them. Okay, that's how most countries are ruled, and that's why they do almost nothing. And most societies are sort of these atheistic situations where the tyrant is like the god and has 100% ability to do whatever they want, and no one else can do anything. All right, so here in the Roman Empire is one of the gladiatorial combats, and once the Catholic rulers came into place, they got rid of this gladiatorial stuff, just killing people for sport, okay? So this is a famous painting, Thumbs Down, by Jean-Léon Gérôme, 1872. And so it's kind of certainly a waste of people to allow that to continue. Okay, now in the Middle Ages, the monks were doing a lot of good work, okay? They were running the farms, many of the farms, and they developed all kinds of innovations, improving the plow and the crop yield, okay? They ran the monasteries where they preserved the books of civilization. They preserved literacy. Wherever they would go, they would bring literacy to those populations. They would translate the Bible. They made the first what we would consider sort of more modern hospitals, okay? Now, don't get me wrong. The Greeks had some special medical sites for taking care of their soldiers. They had health shrines like that of Asclepius. They had, St. Augustine had hospice for pilgrims. And, of course, the Romans, had built aqueducts and sewers and, to get you closer to some of the amenities of a more modern healthcare facility. Okay, they certainly didn't know much about pharmaceuticals, which we think of as modern medicine, but, there's changing the bandage on the lepers and all that other stuff, fixing wounds and all that other stuff. So the monks made and ran the early, relatively modern, by the standards available at that time, hospitals in Europe. Okay, the other thing the monks did, they were very smart. They developed metallurgy, they developed astronomy, they made the clocks, and they were very good clockmakers, and they ran the calendars because they had to keep track of the calendar to know when to plan for the church holidays. They provided a sense of community. There would be a local church in a community, and they would have feast days on the saints' days, and then they would have the other big holidays. They'd have the Mass on Sundays, and so it gave a cycle to people's community. And in those days, they had a chain of being, and that it was pretty clear where one's place was in the cosmic hierarchy, and there was a community and meaning to people's lives, and it was an understandable thing. Okay, the other thing I would talk about here, because I'm talking kind of about the Middle Ages, was the monks. Now, there were monks, a lot of them in France and Italy and from Ireland and other places. And the monks are really the ones who kept civilization alive. Here's a book called How the Irish Saved Civilization by Thomas Cahill. And these monks, they would copy all the ancient books from the Greeks, from the Romans, and the Bible. And there would be many monasteries full of these books. And that was very important because these, like Viking raiders would come in. They would, try to kill everybody, RAPE, the nuns, wherever they could find them, and anybody else. And they would steal all their stuff. And they would often, unfortunately, even burn down monastery libraries. But luckily, there were enough monastery libraries that, the books we're aware of now were all preserved. Okay, and they did a lot of things too. They added to them even by the illustrations in the margin. This is the famous Irish Book of Kells illustration of the Bible. It's very beautiful, and it kind of reminds me of the little stuff added on later on by Sergio Aragonés of Mad Magazine in the margins, his drawings, marginalia. And it reminds me also of the great comedies of Monty Python's. They would take drawings that were very similar to those made in the margins by the monks. Oh, by the way, too, this is one of the monks, St. Columba of Ireland, and he was one of the great all-time monks who started a whole bunch of monasteries. Okay, really did things to make the world a better place. And that's how the Irish saved civilization, because they were the best of the monks at saving these ancient books. Okay, and of course we know the story of the crucifixion of Christ. He rose on the third day. He forgave the good thief on his right with the angel above him. And then there's the bad thief over here who did not repent, and the devil stomping on his shoulder. That doesn't look good. Longinus, the Roman soldier, put a spear into the side of Christ, and then an angel collected his blood into the Holy Grail, and that's supposed to heal everything. Okay, you got the three Marys down below, the cross, Adam, Calvary, and all this stuff. Anyways, we'll come back to how all these things relate. And I just want to say a little bit about the ancient Greeks, because the Catholic Church comes way more out of ancient Greece than is widely recognized. Yes, of course, it comes out of the Old Testament, but it comes out of ancient Greece way more than people realize. And the ancient Greeks were by far the best of the old civilizations. They were totally superior to anything else in the ancient world. And I just want to share with you some of the great achievements of the ancient Greeks, because basically Catholicism absorbed all of this. And Catholicism is syncretic. It doesn't just say we're the only thing. It looks around and whatever peoples it has, and if they got something good, it sort of just absorbs that in. That's what it means to be syncretic, to learn what you can from others. First of all, it was the first country to have free speech. Okay, in other places, you just have some brutal ruler who doesn't tolerate it. First place to have epic poetry like the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. First historians to write in prose, like Herodotus, the father of history, writing about the Persian War. And then it also had the first skeptical Machiavellian-like historian with Thucydides, who wrote the Peloponnesian War, which is magnificent. Everybody should read that book. And if you don't have time to read it, just know about Milos, okay? Know about Pericles' funeral oration. Know about the plague in Athens, okay? Those are some of the things you should know. You should also know about what happened with Alcibiades in Syracuse, okay? And then the aftermath of it all. But he doesn't get to that in his book. Okay, it was the first place to have theater, drama, tragedies, comedies, Greek mythology, all this with the great Greek playwrights. Aeschylus, Aristophanes, Euripides, Sophocles are magnificent. First philosophers, the pre-Socratics, like Heraclitus, Democritus, and all that. Pythagoras, the Socratics, Plato, wrote all about him in Plato's Republic and his other dialogues. Aristotle, the foundation of philosophy is really Aristotle. He's better than Plato. Post-Socratics, the Cynics, cynicism of Diogenes, skepticism, Epicureans, the letter of the law in Christian philosophy, and Aristotelium, okay, part of the spirit of the law in Christianity. All right, so anyways, big time stuff came out of ancient Greece. The first serious biologist was Aristotle. He tried to classify the animal specimens. Alexander the Great went all over the world sending specimens back to him. Aristotle's Lyceum was the first school of biology, first school of zoology, first medical school in a sense. The first library was Aristotle's Lyceum with a large collection of scrolls. Later on, the library in Alexandria was largely, put there by the Greeks. First scholars of rhetoric like Aristotle, writing down all the good speaking methods. First genius engineers and physicists like Archimedes, who was a magnificent engineer. If you read about the Battle of Syracuse between the Romans, I made a video about it. It's extraordinary. Also, he developed the early form of calculus, Archimedes, which was later, optimized into the modern form by Gottfried Leibniz in Germany and Isaac Newton in England. First great building, the Parthenon. First great sculpture by the ancient Greeks. Ptolemy was a Greek astronomer, made the first major astronomy system. They would have Olympic Games. Okay, the Olympic Games were playing. They were competition amongst athletes, not like gladiatorial games where people die. Okay, they had the first, the best. The Greek mythology is magnificent. It's better than the mythology of any other country. It's magnificent. This led, of course, to the great theater, great painting, great metaphor. The paintings didn't survive so well. Tons of wonderful literary, philosophical metaphors come from Greek mythology. They had a sophisticated military and navy. They had early medicine with Asclepius healing centers, and then Hippocrates and dietary therapy. So that was sort of the first widely known dietary therapy, Hippocrates. They were great at early mathematics, and Pythagoras with the Pythagorean theorem, the mathematics and geometry of Plato's Academy, Euclid in geometry, Archimedes with his calculus, Pythagoras discovering the octave system in music in a mathematical sense, Pythagoras developing the concept of the plant-based diet, the vegetarian diet, Athens, the first democracy. And then why did they fall? Because they were internally bickering and they couldn't unite themselves. They were weakened by the Peloponnesian War, and the Macedonians came in. Basically, King Philip had learned their methods from them and was able to unify Macedonia and conquer the Greeks, who were not unified. Later, his son, Alexander the Great, would spread Greek culture widely. Okay, I'm just going to now talk a little bit about first from Christianity. Because in the public schools, the purpose of the public schools is to turn children away from God, turn them away from their parents, make them into little conformist, atheist consumers. And I just want you to get a few things. The Catholic Church began with Christ and his disciples. St. Peter, who was one of his disciples, he described him as, "You are the rock upon which I shall build my church." St. Peter is buried underneath the Vatican, okay? That's the beginning of the Catholic Church, the beginning of the Christian Church, okay? All these Protestants and all these other sects are Johnny, come lately wannabes. All right, the Catholic Church maintained literacy throughout the world, the European world in particular, with the scribes in the monasteries, preserved the ancient books of the Greeks and Romans and the Christians in the Bible. And its books pretty much are the most important thing for saving civilization so that the knowledge gets taught to the next generation. Books last longer than buildings and paintings. They're easier to copy and maintain. And nowadays with the printing press, even more easy. I think you should have real books. Don't trust stuff to the internet. Stuff could be deleted from the internet. Only the church cared about saving the books. The secular rulers didn't care about it. There was no other academic institutions to care about it. If it was not for the Catholic Church, almost everything from ancient Greece and ancient Rome would have been lost. Okay, mankind would have, drifted back into barbarism completely, and would have been who knows how long before he came out of it. They make the best architecture, the Catholic Church. They made better buildings in the 1200s than we make now. The best fresco paintings, Michelangelo, Raphael. The best canvas paintings, Caravaggio, Edmund Leighton, Karl Bloch, and others. The Carolingian Renaissance of Charlemagne and Alcuin, which, Charlemagne insisted the monks copy all these books. Alcuin was a great scholar, and they made the cathedrals into schools, so they had the first academic system, the first university system. They made the first universities. Scholastic Renaissance of Abelard and St. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s. Charlemagne was around 800 AD. Scholastic Renaissance in the 1200s AD. The Italian Renaissance came later in the 1400s and 1500s with the greatest pope, which was Pope Julius, the one who commissioned Michelangelo and Raphael and Bramante. They developed, like I said, the first universities. The best novels are from Christian writers, like Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz. Okay, if you looked at the best 20 novels, 19 out of the 20, they're all from Christians, okay? They make the best literature. They make the best painting. Michelangelo, the best sculpture. Bernini, the best sculpture. Okay, we already said they're the best architecture. They developed the farming methods, metallurgy. Yeah, okay, great. They did all that. And the other really important thing is they developed the concept of natural rights. It comes from Genesis in the Bible. But they insisted on natural rights, just based on being human, being alive, be extended to everyone. And that includes unborn babies. That includes people from other cultures. Most secular rulers, they have some loyalty to their own people, their own ethnic group, their own territory, but they usually have none to anyone anywhere else. And the Catholic Church, it came about from the Spanish missionaries in South America in particular, and they felt that the secular Spaniards had been treating them unfairly. So they insisted on it, and they made a big fuss about it and went back to Spain and made a giant big deal about it, that the people of South America deserve more kindness and better treatment than they're getting. And that's part of how international law was developed, and law in general. And it's a very good thing. What it says is just because somebody's different than you, you shouldn't be cruel to them, and you shouldn't just take advantage of them. So it was really big on that. Like Christ had said, I think that's, was that John 13:34. I have one other commandment for you, that you should love your neighbor as I have loved you. Okay? Catholic Church, the Christians make the best music. Just look at it. Look at all my videos on Christian music. They're magnificent. They're beyond good. They're sublime. Okay. So is their art. So are their cathedrals. They're the best. Thomas Woods, the Catholic Church is the best institution ever in the history of mankind. And that is a true statement. I say that based on extensive study, extensive consideration of the question. Okay, we're going to leave it at that for this part 2 of how the Catholic Church built civilization. We got a lot more slides to go, and we're going to show mostly pictures from here on out. I think you're going to find it very beautiful.